When the door was locked, above the valley of the Piave there is a dam. It is standing tonight, whole. It never broke. That is the horror of this one. The dam held. The town below it is gone anyway. Right above the lake behind that dam stands a mountain called Monte Toc. For weeks it has been moving, not falling. Moving. On the company's own instruments on this day it is sliding about a meter. Not a meter a year, a meter in the day. The men who own the dam are watching the numbers climb. They have not told the town. The town is Longarone. The 9th of October, 1963. A Wednesday. 10:30 at night, and most of it is still up. There is a European Cup tie on the radio. Real Madrid against the Rangers of Glasgow. Neighbors are in each other's houses. It is that kind of night. When the dam was finished 3 years before, it was one of the tallest in the world. More than 260 meters of concrete curved into the rock, the pride of the valley. Behind it, a long narrow lake held between two walls of rock. And along the flank above that lake, a crack about 2 kilometers long had opened in the shape of a letter M. At 39 minutes past 10, the mountain stops moving slowly. The whole north face of Monte Toc, about 260 million cubic meters of rock and earth and standing forest, lets go at once. It goes into the lake in about 25 seconds. Understand what that does. 260 million cubic meters of mountain drop into a full lake, and the water has nowhere to go but up and out. Longarone, the 9th of October, 1963. It rises 250 meters, up the far wall of the gorge and over the top of the dam. A wave clears the dam and comes down the gorge onto Longarone, and the dam does not break. The concrete held. The engineering worked. What came down on the town was not a broken dam. It was a lake thrown over the top of a wall that did exactly what it was built to do. 3 things to hold on to. 1. This was written down before it happened, in a newspaper 4 years before, and the woman who wrote it was put on trial for it. 2. The company that filled the lake had already worked out, on paper, that a slide could throw the water clean over the dam. They had the number. They kept filling. 3. The dam is still there, whole. It never broke. It is the last thing standing above the place the town used to be. 10:30 at night. Let us start there. So let us go down into the town while it is still there. Longarone sits on the flat where the gorge opens out onto the floor of the Piave Valley. It is not a large place, it is a working valley. Stone and timber and the river running through the middle of it. And it is one thing more you would never guess to look at it. This is a valley of ice cream men. The valleys that climb away above Longarone, Zoldo, and the Cadore sent their men out across Europe to sell gelato for generations. Off to Germany, to Austria, to Holland, behind a counter in some northern city. A mountain family's trade carried a long way from the mountains. They went out in the spring. They worked the warm months far from home, and they came back up the valley for the winter when the season was over. And Longarone was where they gathered, the market town, the leading place of the ice cream makers coming home. And it is October. The season is ending. That is who is in this valley tonight. People who go out into the world and come back to a floor of stone by a river. It is Wednesday, the 9th of October, cold and clear the way it gets in the Alps in October. The light goes off the tops of the mountains early. The valley floor turns blue and then it turns dark. The lamps come on in the windows down the length of the main street. Supper is on. It is the middle of an ordinary week, and tonight there is football. A European Cup night, Real Madrid and the Rangers of Glasgow, a long way from this valley, carried in over the radio. Neighbors drift into the houses and the bars that have a set. Chairs are pulled up, somebody turns it louder. Up the gorge above them, in the dark, the dam stands, the tallest wall in the world, the pride of the valley, holding back its long black lake. It is a good night to be indoors, and here is the thing to hold on to. On the 9th of October, 1963, there is nothing wrong with Longarone at all. A whole town alive on an ordinary Wednesday with the football on, and the ice cream men come home for the winter. Hold it there, just as it is, because we are about to lose it. The whole thing takes about 4 minutes. The wave comes down the gorge as a wall of water, and the air shoved along in front of it. The air arrives first, In the houses that survived above the floodline, the windows blew in before the water came. Then the water. Longarone sits on the flat where the gorge opens out. There is nothing to slow it and nothing to stand in its way. It does not rise through the town the way a river rises. It passes over the town. And when it has gone by, the valley floor is scraped down to gravel and rock. Not flooded, not wrecked, taken away. Longarone. And around it, the smaller places, Pirago, Rivalta, Villanova, Fayet. Gone the same way, in the same 4 minutes. In the gray of the next morning, there is a plain of wet stone where the town had been, and the Piave running through the middle of it, quiet, as if nothing had ever been built there at all. The men who reached the valley at first light walked out onto bare ground and could not say where the streets had run. A church tower stood. Almost nothing else did. There was a working town on the floor of this valley the evening before. In the morning, there was the shape of the ground it had stood on. Here is what the world was told in the days after, that this was a natural catastrophe, a freak of the mountains, something no one could have seen coming. In the English papers, it came out as an act of God. In the Italian, the word was unforeseeable, a wave of nature out of a clear sky on a valley that happened to be in the way. The company that built the dam and filled the lake said, in effect, that the mountain had betrayed everyone equally, them included. And it is a good story. It has no defendant in it. If the mountain did this on its own, then the dam is not to blame, and the dam, after all, is still standing. There is your proof. The wall held. The trouble with the story is the paperwork. Because the same valley, the same mountain, and the same company have been generating paper for years. Warnings in print. Warnings in geology. Warnings run through a laboratory and written up as numbers. None of it was missing. It had been ignored, sued, and shelved. Start with the one that was public. The one anybody in Italy could have read 4 years before for the price of a newspaper. Step back from the water for a moment and look at the wall itself. Italy after the war was hungry for power. Not the political kind. The kind that comes down a wire and turns a factory. The North was rebuilding, and the mountains had what the factories needed: steep valleys, rivers, and the fall of water from a height. The company that gathered it up here was private. AGE, the Adriatic Electricity Company. It owned the rivers of this corner of the Alps the way a landlord owns a street. And in the gorge of the Vajont, a side cut above the Piave, its engineers found the best site of all, a narrow throat of hard limestone or a very tall wall that hold back a very long lake. What they built there was not a crude plug of concrete. It was a double curvature arch, a wall curved in 2 directions at once, bowed across the gorge, and leaned back into it, so the weight of the water pushes the concrete harder into the rock on either side. The more the lake presses, the tighter the wall grips the mountain. That is the idea. It is a beautiful idea. When it was finished around 1960, it stood among the tallest structures of its kind anywhere on Earth. Thinner than you would think, for its height. Elegant. The men who drew it were the best in the country, and it shows. It worked. Understand that clearly. It has never stopped working. This is the thing people get wrong about Vajont. They picture a cheap dam, a corner cut, a crack in the concrete. There was no crack. The wall was a triumph of engineering, genuinely. The pride of the valley and of the nation that built it. And that is exactly why what happened next is not a failure. A failure is a thing that breaks. This wall did not break. Everything that went wrong at Vajont was decided by a man at a desk. Above ground, the wall could not see. He was a journalist for El Unata, the communist paper, and she came from these valleys. She knew the people on the reservoir's edge, Erto, Casso, the hamlets above the water. On the 5th of May, 1959, more than 4 years before the wave, she published a piece in the national paper. The headline, translated, runs roughly, "Sade throws its weight around, but the mountain folk fight back." Sade was the company, the Adriatic Electricity Company, the owner of the dam. Merlin wrote down what the villagers were saying and what she could see for herself, that a reservoir was being filled against unstable ground, that the mountain above it was not solid. And this is the line that matters, that the water could one day bring the houses down into the lake. She did not have the company's instruments. She did not have a meter a day reading off a gauge. She had the mountain, the village, and her own two eyes. And she printed the mechanism 4 years early in the newspaper. The houses into the lake. That is the first thing to hold on to, paid off. It was written down before it happened. Now watch what a company does when the truth is printed against it. The response to Tina Merlin's article was not an inspection of Monte Toc. It was a criminal charge. At the instigation of the company's president, Vittorio Cini, she was reported to the police. The charge was spreading false and tendentious news, liable to disturb public order. False news for printing that the mountain might come down. She was tried in Milan, not in the valley, in Milan, in a court a long way from Erto. On the 30th of November, 1960, the judge, a man named Angelo Salvini, acquitted her. The court found that what she had written was neither false, nor exaggerated, nor tendentious, that she had done no more than exercise the right to report. Read that plainly. In 1960, an Italian court examined the claim that the Vajont reservoir was dangerous and ruled that it was not false. 3 years before the mountain fell, the danger had been to court and won. Now the company that brought the charge and lost it went back up the valley and kept raising the water. The town the wave destroyed was Longarone, on the valley floor. But Longarone is not where the fear began. The fear began high above the lake, on the rim of the gorge, in 2 old stone villages, Erto and Casso. They sit on the flank of Monte Toc itself, above the water, on the mountain that was moving. These were not new places. They were centuries old, houses of gray stone stacked up the slope, mule paths, terraces, a church, walls that had stood longer than anyone could count. And then the lake came up to meet them. Year by year, as the company filled the reservoir, the water climbed the sides of the valley the villages looked down on. Paths that had always gone somewhere now went under. The bottom of the world, for the people of Erto and Casso, was rising toward them. They could measure it against their own walls. They could hear the mountain, at night, working. Tina Merlin was a Belluna woman, born up in these mountains. That is why she wrote what she wrote. She was writing down what the mountain folk already knew in their feet. They knew the ground moved. They lived on it. They took their fear to the company and to the officials, in the plain words of people who have watched a hillside their whole lives, and they were answered the way such people are usually answered, that they did not understand the engineering, that the instruments said otherwise, that the lake was safe, and progress was progress, and a mountain village was not the place to argue with it. The water kept climbing. The people who lived closest to it, who could reach out and touch how high it had come, were the people whose word counted for least. They were right, and it did them no good at all. That is a thing about Vajont worth holding on to. The ones who saw it first were the ones nobody would hear. Dawn Merlin was not lucky, and she was not alone. The rock agreed with her. The mountain's name is Toc. In the local dialect it comes from patok, rotten, soft, ground that falls apart. The people who lived under it had a phrase for it. They called it the walking mountain, and the geology bore the name out. A young geologist surveyed the valley as the dam was being built. His name was Edoardo Semenzas. His father was Carlo Semenzas, the dam's own chief designer, the man who conceived the great curved wall. The son working the slopes above his father's dam found something, an ancient landslide, a whole flank of the mountain that had slid once in the deep past and had come to rest as a loose mass sitting on a buried surface. Ground that had failed here before, which meant it could fail here again. He mapped its edge with another geologist, Franco Giudici, and in 1960 a crack appeared on the mountainside, running about 2 kilometers, in a long, shallow M, tracing, almost exactly, the outline of the mass they had drawn. An Austrian specialist in slope stability, Leopold Müller, was brought in to study it. So this is the position by 1960. A journalist has printed the danger, a court has ruled it real, and the company's own designer's son has mapped an ancient slide on the exact slope above the lake, and the lake is not lowered. It is filled higher. Come back to the two Semenzas because the family is the whole of it in miniature. Carlo Semenza was one of the finest dam engineers Italy ever produced. He designed something like 15 major dams across the country. The Vajont Arch was to be the crown of the work, his last great project before he retired. He did not draw a bad wall. Everyone agrees on that, even now. The trouble was never the wall he drew. It was the mountain he chose to lean it against, and the man who found the flaw in that mountain was his own son, Erto Semenza, the geologist you have already met, the one who read the rock above the dam and mapped the ancient slide. Think about the position that put the father in. The evidence against his masterpiece was being handed to him by his own son, in his own field of expertise, turned against him. We do not know what passed between them. The record does not give us that room, and I am not going to invent it for you. Those who worked with Carlo Semenza in his last years spoke, afterward, of a man troubled by the slope. That is as far as the record goes, and it is far enough, because Carlo Semenza never saw the disaster. On the 30th of October 1961, 2 years before the wave, he died. A stroke, at home. He did not have to watch the mountain prove his son right. When the trials came, the court at L'Aquila cleared his name of blame for the deaths. The designer was exonerated. His dam still stands, exactly as he drew it, and the mountain he set it against did exactly what his son said it would. Then the mountain gave a demonstration. On the 4th of November 1960, as the reservoir was being filled for the first time and the water climbed the slope, a piece of Monte Toc let go. Several 100,000 cubic meters of it slid into the lake at once. A fresh crack opened above. This is 3 years before the disaster. The mountain moved into the water on schedule exactly as the geology said it would. The company reacted. They lowered the lake by about 50 meters to calm the slope. That worked. The creep slowed, so they had it in their hands. A live proof that the mountain would slide if they filled the lake, and a live proof that lowering the lake made it stop. The choice was in front of them, in plain numbers. Fill it and the mountain moves. Empty it and the mountain rests. Here is what they built next. Not a smaller reservoir, a tunnel. A bypass tunnel along the side of the gorge, so that if the slide came down and split the lake in two, the two halves would still be joined, and the water could still be used. Read what that decision assumes. It assumes the slide is coming. It plans for the day the mountain falls into the lake. They did not build a way to prevent it. They built a way to keep the reservoir working after it happened. By 1962, the company was worried enough to run the experiment properly. They commissioned a scale model, a physical model of the gorge, the lake, and the dam built in a hydraulics laboratory. Then they did the obvious thing. They dropped a model landslide into the model lake, and they measured the wave it made. They ran it again and again at different water levels, and the model told them this. If the water was high within about 20 meters of the top of the dam, a slide could throw a wave over the crest, over the top, down the gorge, onto whatever was below. That is the second thing to hold on to. Paid off. The company had the number, not a suspicion, a measured result in a laboratory on paper. So they set a limit, a level they called safe, around 25 meters below the crest, and told themselves that below it, a wave could not get over. They did not stop filling. They set a line on the wall and kept the water under it. The whole safety of the town of Longarone now rested on a company keeping the lake below a chalk mark it had drawn for itself. On the night of the 9th of October, the water was near that mark, and the slide, when it came, was far larger than the one in the model. There was one more number, and it is the quietest of them. By 1963, the geologists were not only mapping the old slide, they could see a mass on the move. The estimate of how much of the mountain was creeping down toward the lake was on the order of 200 million cubic meters. Not a whole mountain, but an enormous mass. The same order of magnitude as what actually came down. Somebody, in other words, had roughly the right answer in advance of the fall, and it changed nothing. The lake stayed high. The filling went on. This is the pattern of Vajont, and it is worth saying slowly. The warnings were never missing. One was printed in a newspaper and its author was taken to court. One was drawn in the rock by the designer's own son. One was measured in a laboratory and turned into a chalk line instead of a stop order. And one was the size of the moving mountain itself, known before it fell. 4 ways of knowing, 4 ways of not acting. Through the summer of 1963, the mountain began to move again. And this time it did not stop. They were measuring it, benchmarks on the slope, read off against fixed points, day after day. At first the movement was about a centimeter a week, slow, the kind of number you can live with. Then it was centimeters a day. Then, in the last stretch, about a meter in a day. Picture the graph on the desk, a line that runs along the bottom for months and then, at the end, stands almost straight up. Every man who needed to understand that line could read it. It is not a subtle line. A slope moving a meter a day is a slope about to go. And the lake was still high, near the chalk mark, near the level their own model had told them a wave could clear the dam. The two facts were sitting on the same desk, the mountain moving a meter a day, the water at the height the model called dangerous. They had the graph, and they had the wave number, and they had the town just down the gorge, in the dark, listening to the football. They did not empty the lake. On the 26th of September, they decided to lower the lake, to draw it down, past the safe mark, down towards a level where, they hoped, even a full slide could not throw a wave over the top. It was the right thing to do. It was also too late. You cannot empty a reservoir that size quickly. Water only leaves through the outlets, as fast as the outlets allow. It goes down by inches a day. And the mountain was moving faster than the lake. By late in the night of the 9th of October, the slope had passed the point where lowering the water could save the town below. The mass was already committed. It was going to fall whatever they did now. They had spent 4 years, and every warning arriving at a lever they pulled 2 weeks too late. At 39 minutes past 10, the mountain took the decision out of their hands, and the wave went where the model had said it would go. Now walk through the last day with me, slowly, the way it actually went. It is Wednesday, the 9th of October, 1963. Up on the slope, the men reading the benchmarks take their numbers as they have every day. The mountain has moved again overnight. Through the day it moves about a meter. In the hours of one ordinary working day. Down at the dam, the outlets are open. They are still trying to lower the lake, as they decided to 2 weeks ago. The water is going down, inches, far slower than the mountain is coming down to meet it. The shift watches both numbers through the afternoon, the slope climbing, the lake crawling lower. Nobody rings the town. There is no plan to ring the town. There never was one. The light goes off the tops of the mountains in the early evening, the way it does in October in the Alps. The valley floor goes blue, then dark. In Longarone, the lamps come on in the windows. It is a working town. It is the middle of the week. Supper is on. Later, the radios go on for the football. A European Cup night, Real Madrid, and the Rangers of Glasgow, a long way from here. Neighbors drift into the houses that have a set. Chairs are pulled up. It is a good night to be indoors. Cold, clear, ordinary. Up the gorge, in the dark, the mountain is now moving faster than a man reading a gauge can quite believe. The lake is still too high. Near the line, their own model called dangerous. The graph on the desk has stopped being a line. It is very nearly a wall. 10:30 comes. The match is on, and 9 minutes are left. Let the town have them. The official count is 1,917 dead. Estimates run to about 2,000. Whole families are inside that figure. Households where nobody was left to be counted, in a town that was scoured to the gravel. Longarone lost the most. Pirago, Rivalta, Villanova, Fayet, the small places lost. In some cases, almost everyone. The commune had held about 7,000 people. On one ordinary Wednesday night, the wave took a number close to 2,000 of them, in 4 minutes, off a valley floor. They were laid in a field at Fortonia, below the town. Today that field is a cemetery of identical white stones, about 1,910 of them, one for each name they could give. Rows of the same small marble marker, the same size, the same shape, running away in straight lines across the grass. That is what a town looks like, afterward, when you lay it out one stone at a time. And above the field, up the gorge, the dam, Still there, still whole, holding back nothing at all. The men who came to help got there in the dark. At about 5:30 in the morning on the 10th of October, the first soldiers of the Italian army reached the edge of what had been Longarone. Most of them were Alpini, mountain troops. Some were combat engineers, men trained to build and to dig. They had been loaded onto trucks in the night and sent up the Piave. The trucks could not get through. The road on the right bank was simply gone. So the column stopped short, near Ponte nelle Alpi, and the soldiers went the rest of the way on foot, in the dark, not yet knowing what they were walking toward. Then the light came up and they saw it. There is a thing that happens to trained men when the task is impossible. They stop, and then they start anyway, because starting is the only thing left to do. There were no buildings to search. That is the part that does not fit in the head. A rescue is walls and rooms and voices under rubble. Here there was gravel and river mud and bare rock scraped clean from one side of the valley to the other. So they dug by hand, in the mud along the Piave and out across the plain for what the river had carried and set down. They worked it for weeks, not days, weeks. It became less a rescue than a slow, patient act of recovery, of trying to give a name back to what the water had taken it from. Much of that work fed one field below the town at Fortana. The soldiers were small out there, spread across the gray of it, bent over the ground. A valley that had held a town the morning before, and now held soldiers, and the river, and the work of counting. They did the counting the only way it could be done, one name at a time. Then came the trials, and they took years. The first thing that happened was that the case was moved. Not held in Belluno, near the valley and the graves, moved south to L'Aquila in Abruzzo, a long way from the families, from the town that would have filled the public gallery. A trial about a drowned valley, held where almost nobody from that valley could sit and watch. The first verdict in 1969 refused to call the disaster foreseeable. It convicted 3 of the company's men only for failing to warn and evacuate. Alberico Biadene, Curzio Bettini, Almo Violin. 6 years apiece, 3 of the 6 later condoned. Others walked free. On appeal, in 1970, that was overturned. The court now said plainly what the paperwork had always said. The disaster was foreseeable. Biadene was found guilty of causing the landslide, the flood, and the deaths. Another engineer with him. And on the 25th of March, 1971, the Court of Cassation, the highest court, confirmed it. Not a natural tragedy, a disaster caused by negligence. The act of God had a verdict against it in the end. The sentences were light, and the process had already taken its own price. In 1968, before the verdicts, one of the company's engineers, Mario Pancini, took his own life. We will leave that there, the way the record leaves it. There is a last thread, and it is about money, and about who is left holding the debt. Ask the simple question. When the bill for Longarone finally came, who paid it? Not as AD, because by the time the wave came down, as AD in the form that built the dam was already gone. In 1962, a year before the disaster, the Italian government nationalized the electricity industry. The private power companies were folded into a single new state utility, ENAL, and so the dam and the lake and the mountain and everything that was known about all 3 passed to the state. Read the timing of that carefully. Months before the collapse, the public bought the reservoir, which means the public bought the liability with it. The state inherited the danger the private company had made and had been warned about, and it kept the lake filling, and then it owned the outcome. What was left of Zeta's 80 was later absorbed into a larger firm again, Monte Toc. So the company that made the decision dissolved into a utility and then into a chemicals giant. The name that printed the danger and put the journalist on trial simply stopped existing. The men who were convicted served little. The sentences we saw were light. The reckoning, when you add it up, was light. It took until 1997, 34 years after the wave, for a court to order Monte Toc to compensate the towns of the valley for what had been done to them. By then, most of the people who had signed off on the lake were dead. Follow the blame through all of it, And watch what happens. It passes from a company to a state to a successor firm, and it thins out at every handoff. The one thing that never moved, never changed hands, and never paid a thing was the wall. Go back one last time to Erto and Casso, the villages on the rim. They were high above the flood. The wave went down the gorge, not up it. Their houses were still standing the next morning. The people who had watched the water climb and said so, and been told they were fools, most of them lived. And then they lost their homes anyway. After the disaster, the authorities looked at the two villages sitting on the flank of Monte Toc, above a reservoir now half full of fallen mountain, and decided they could not stay. Ground that had failed once could not be trusted under a village. So the order came down to empty Erto and Casso, to move the people off the mountain their families had lived on for centuries. A new place was built for those who would go well away from the valley, down on the plain toward Monte in the province of Pordenone. It was drawn up whole at a desk by a planner, a town designed all at once on flat ground for people taken off a slope. They gave the new town a name. They called it Vajont. But not everyone went. Many of the people of Erto and Casso defied the ban. They climbed back up the mountain to the stone houses that were still standing and refused to leave them. The villages are there today, still a commune, on the flank of Monte Toc above the water. The reservoir was named safe. The people who lived beside it and doubted it were taken to court, or waved away, or both. Some were carried off their mountain and set down on a plain in a new town named for the thing that had cost them everything. And some simply went back up and stayed because the ground was theirs. They had been right from the start. It did not save the ones on the valley floor. It did not give the dead back. But up on the rim, the people who had seen it coming climbed home to their own stone houses and stayed. It is the one place in this whole story where being right was allowed to count for something. Go up the gorge today and the dam is there, whole, uncracked. More than 260 meters of curved concrete, exactly as it was drawn. It holds back a little water and a great deal of fallen mountain. It never failed. It is, by any engineer's measure, a success. That is the third thing to hold on to. Pay off. The dam is still standing. It is the last thing standing above the place the town used to be. And that is the whole of Vajont in one object. The wall did its job. The men who filled the lake behind it did not do theirs. And because the wall is intact, it can still be pointed at, as if it proved the mountain acted alone. Longarone was rebuilt, a new town on the swept ground beside the field of white stones. The company, ASAD, had already been folded into the state utility before the disaster, and later into a larger firm which, in 1997, was ordered to pay the valley's towns for what was done to them. And the paper they tried to bury under a court case and a chalk line in an unsent report, is now protected. The records of the Vajont criminal trial are inscribed in UNESCO's Memory of the World, the register of documents the world has agreed not to lose, the warning that was taken to court, the wave that was measured in a laboratory, the line that ran straight up off the gauge, all of it kept. Tina Merlin did not stop. 20 years after the wave, in 1983, she published the whole story in a book. She called it Sur la pelle viva, on living skin. The woman they had taken to court for spreading false news wrote the account that has largely stood. So here's what is left on the floor of the Piave Valley. A cemetery of about 1,910 identical stones, a rebuilt town beside it, a file in a register of things the world agreed to keep, and a dam, whole, intact. 260 meters of concrete, holding back a lake that is mostly mountain now. Everything at Vajont failed. The company, the inspectors, the court that moved south. The lever pulled 2 weeks late. Everything failed except the one thing they built to hold. The dam never broke. That was never the problem.